I love the retro video games of my childhood. I was an NES and Sega Genesis guy primarily because those were the consoles I owned, and later the Nintendo 64. At $60+ per cartridge, games were tough to come by, so getting a new game was the heavyweight gift for birthdays and Christmas. So when I discovered emulation in the late 90s and early 2000s, it blew my mind that through special means, I could play just about any retro game on my computer. As I grew up, with few exceptions, my gaming tastes never really evolved. When I kick back with a video game today, it's almost always with a retro game. So this past year, largely inspired by JuntSNES and Junt's SD to SNES device, I decided I needed a portable, comfortable, high-quality method of playing every retro game ever. I settled on the GPD XD Plus, which I promise I'm in no way sponsored by, but I do want to tell you all about it because I've just been loving it. To be more precise, I bought the GPD XD Plus 2019 update for $220. So that's a lot of money for a portable system meant only for emulation. The Nintendo new 3DS XL costs the same amount. You may also be thinking, there are a ton of ways to play retro games that don't cost nearly that much. But I had to ask myself, do they meet all of my requirements in a single solution? I was looking for it to be portable, and more lightweight than the standard Nintendo Switch. I commute a lot and rarely have an opportunity to cannibalize a TV in the house, and more often than not, I'm just playing a few rounds and putting it down again. However, the ability to output over HDMI to a television would maximize options. And to that extent, the screen resolution should be at least 720p, and it should support wireless Bluetooth and/or USB controllers, such as those from 8BitDo. Setup needs to be easy. There are way too many homebrew solutions that risk bricking the device or just require way too much maintenance to make it work. Finally, it should be powerful enough to play N64 or PlayStation ROMs, and preferably GameCube or PS2 era games too. Available modern options for retro gaming and emulation include virtual consoles, Nintendo Online, and retro releases like the Rare Replay or Disney Classics releases. These are awesome ways, maybe the best modern ways of playing classic games, but in the case of the Wii Virtual Console, the resolution is limited to 480p, and since the Wii Virtual Console is retired, you'd have to buy a system that has games already downloaded. The Wii U, with its partially portable gamepad, has a better Virtual Console with unique releases such as Duck Hunt with the Wiimote. I actually think the Wii U Virtual Console may be the best way to play N64 games like Mario 64 and Star Fox, but it's all very limited, from the lack of portability to the retirement of these services. Like Nintendo Online is a really awesome way to play retro games with the portability and resolution, but the selection is kinda so-so, and the subscription model means you don't permanently own these games. Finally, the retro re-releases like the Disney Afternoon or Rare Replay are very cool, but they're few and far between. Mini consoles, such as the NES or SNES Classics or the Genesis Mini. I love these mini systems, but they're not portable, and without some black magic, you're limited to the games that come packaged, and the third-party showing here is really slim. Like, you won't see the classic Ninja Turtle games on these, for instance. I have the 3 major mini consoles, and unfortunately, they spend a lot of time not getting played. Install a RetroPie image on a cheap Raspberry Pi Linux machine. I actually bought a RetroPie machine from a sketchy seller online who had preloaded an SD card with thousands of games. It actually worked well out of the box, though it took almost 5 minutes for Retro Orange Pi to load the operating system on it. But I wanted to connect a Bluetooth retro controller, and it required that I updated some packages. Doing this borked the OS, and I worked my butt off to fix it by trying to load a new image on the SD card, and just nothing worked. The solution is way too labor-intensive, and it's not portable. Homebrew Wii or Wii U. I actually have a couple of hacked Wiis in my house, but they're 480p at best, and the Wii requires that obnoxious Wiimote that always runs out of batteries to do anything.
The batteries are horrible on these. As soon as you turn it off and then you go do something else and come back like a week later, the batteries will be dead.
The Wii Classic controller is also only okay. Hacking the Wii in the first place isn't easy, and again, these aren't portable solutions either. Retro emulation consoles, such as the Retron 5 or the Retro Champ or the newly released Polymega. There's a lot of this kind of thing on the market right now. I actually own a Retron 5, which allows me to play 9 different cartridge types with classic controller inputs over one HDMI connection to the TV. It's a great excuse to pull out old cartridges, including Gameboy. But again, not portable, and without hacking, it's limited to physical cartridges. Still, at only $50, if you have a cartridge collection that's otherwise just sitting there, I do recommend the Retron 5. EverDrive carts. These things are very cool. Junt's SD to SNES is actually an example.
You put a little flash card in the top, and you can load it up with ROMs and just play them whenever you want. And since I've gotten it, I play a whole lot more Super Nintendo. It can emulate almost all of the special chips in cartridges, which means games like Star Fox you can actually play.
This makes the EverDrive product line kind of specialized and therefore a lot more expensive.
I think one of these would go for like $200.
Yeah, $200.
But the Game Boy one, the EverDrive GB for $160, did pique my interest because I own a Game Boy Advance SP, which is one of my favorite portable game form factors. The idea of having every Game Boy game in a single cart on the SP was fairly appealing, but very expensive and limited to that platform. Retro emulation portable consoles, like the BitBoy, which runs RetroPie, or the Hyperkin Smart Boy, which is a Game Boy-style carriage for your smartphone. These seem to be kind of hit or miss. The BitBoy is only $40, but it's really tiny, no HDMI out from what I can tell, and sort of a crappy screen. Phone adapters like Smart Boy don't really appeal to me. I don't like using my phone as a gaming device, nor would I want to drain its battery. A hacked Nintendo DS or PSP. I used to run an R4 card in my DS Lite to run classic games, and the setup was actually pretty easy, but the screen resolution on the DS is low, and I found the emulation was off the mark for a lot of games. The screen dimensions also didn't accommodate basic games like Sonic 2. People rave about the PSP as a great, affordable, portable emulator, and I'm sure it's a good option if your PSP is just collecting dust, but it's got a 480p screen resolution. If it wasn't for that, though, this would be a great option, as loading ROMs and emulators to the PSP looks very easy. So, that finally brings us to the GPD XD Plus. At first glance, you'd think it was a 3DS with its clamshell design. Its screen resolution is 720p, and the gamepad is both simple and complex enough to accommodate just about any retro game. You've got your volume controls, and you can make this nice and loud, 2 control sticks on the left and right, a D-pad of course, 4 action buttons a la the SNES, 4 shoulder buttons, and 2 additional trigger buttons on the front, as well as back, home, and application buttons. The start and select buttons are on the left side. I'm fine with that for the select button, but I have to admit it's really weird to reach for pause or start with my left thumb. I'm just so used to it being on the right. We have a headphone jack, HDMI mini for video out, micro USB for charging and wired controllers, and a micro SD slot that supports just about any micro SD size, so you can really load this thing up with games. GPD stands for Gamepad Digital, which is the Chinese manufacturer, and they seem to make a bunch of gamepad-centric hardware for common operating systems. I'm not familiar with any of their other stuff besides this machine. Okay, so let me be real. The GPD XD is just an Android touchscreen with a well-designed gamepad attached. That's all it is. And that's exactly what it needs to be. Literally all you need is a micro SD card loaded with ROMs. Through the Google Play Store, you can download an emulator for just about any classic console, some of which are free with ads, but for just a couple of extra dollars in most cases, I recommend paying for the emulators, such as SNES 9X and MyBoy. When launching the emulator, you can simply browse to your SD card, select your ROM, and you're gaming. The screen is a touchscreen, allowing you to scroll through the ROM lists more quickly. The display looks gorgeous, and when it comes to the 2D games, I have yet to encounter any flaws in the emulation. Just the perfect experience. I also didn't have to fuss much with the control presets. Almost everything mapped as I would expect it to. Though in the case of NES, I had a different preference for what A and B were among the 4 buttons. I like A to be B and B to be A in this case, because that's the general orientation of the original NES controller. I used M64 Plus to play Nintendo 64 games, and after a lot of bad N64 emulator experiences in my life, I was very pleasantly surprised with the results here. I played Wave Race, Diddy Kong Racing, Super Mario 64, Mario Kart 64, Rogue Squadron, Yoshi's Story, and Star Fox 64 at length and didn't observe any issues. I also played Shadows of the Empire from beginning to end, which was one of my favorite titles as a kid. With that one, there were some spontaneous video display and speed issues, at times making the game unplayable. But when they popped up, I was always able to go into the emulator settings and experiment with the configuration to fix it. I only had to do this a handful of times, and otherwise had a pretty normal experience with the game. The battery life has been phenomenal. When fully charged, it seems to last for about 8 hours with high screen brightness, and charging from empty to full battery takes about 4 hours. As I mentioned, it's tailored to be a gaming machine, but it's really just an Android device, so you can join Wi-Fi and watch YouTube and browse the internet and even download Android games and play with the built-in gamepad. I especially enjoyed doing that with the Christian Whitehead remasters of the classic Sonic the Hedgehog games. These things are amazing remasters of Sonic 1, 2, and CD in widescreen with newly rendered 3D special stages, more options such as enabling the spin dash in Sonic 1 or playing as Knuckles and Tails, options for the Japanese box art and soundtracks, and so much more. They're far and away the best versions of these games, and yet the remasters for Sonic 1 and 2 were only released on Android and iOS. Because of the GPD XD, I get to have a first-class experience with these. I think it checks as many of the boxes as any solution reasonably could, but there are a few things I really wish were better. To start, the hinge on the clamshell is a little cheap. For a while, it was hard to get it to shut all the way, as the hinge would suspend it slightly, which then caused it to wake up if you bumped it, and if you weren't charging it, it would get hot and drain the battery without you knowing. But after using it for the better part of a year, the hinge has gotten weak, and so it closes easily now, but I have to bend it back further to keep gravity from shutting it. I'm sure it doesn't help that my daughter sometimes watches cartoons on it and has messed with it a bunch. The controls all feel good, except for the D-pad, which I give a B-. It's honestly fine, but it's spongy and doesn't have that nice click that makes it clear when you're pressing one direction and not another. The control sticks, on the other hand, feel great, and I've actually found myself using those more often than not for even 2D platformers. But using a control stick for left, right, down, and up makes it easy to be imprecise and go down when you meant to go left, for instance. So this is a disappointing but not deal-breaking aspect. You can output to your TV with a mini HDMI adapter, and it looks great at 720p. You do need to leave the gamepad open, because otherwise it goes to sleep and you lose the TV image. My big goal was to play with one or multiple 8BitDo Bluetooth classic controllers. If you haven't heard of this company, they make expensive but incredible wireless classic controllers that feel way better than the GPD's gamepad, and way better than the original SNES or NES or Genesis or really any classic controller I've ever played. And they have so many amazing options, from arcade devices to stylish mods of just about every classic controller. For the NES, SNES, and Genesis mini consoles, these things are the way to go. The GPD XD does support Bluetooth, so I paired my 8BitDo controller without issue and was able to play in short order. But guess what? Like pretty much all Bluetooth, there's a very slight delay, and I thought maybe I could tolerate it, but I absolutely can't. It turns out that especially in platformers where jumping and timing is the entire game, having dissonant controller input just ruins it. There are non-Bluetooth solutions like your standard 2.4 GHz USB wireless controllers, and I hear those work much better, so I'll probably check those out. But I do play the Nintendo Switch with the 8BitDo Pro controller, and that works flawlessly. I don't detect any delay there at all. So I wish I knew why it didn't work properly with the GPD. My only other complaint is the device has a bright indicator light for the battery, blue when charged, red when low, and purple when charging. This is pretty annoying when you want to play a game before bed and you're stuck with a bright blue nightlight when you're done, but it's nothing tape can't fix. Overall, it's a beautiful presentation, a very comfortable experience, easy to set up, and it encourages me to try games and consoles I've never played. Supposedly, it plays PS2, Dreamcast, and even some GameCube generation games, which I haven't checked out yet. At the price point, yeah, you could buy a Nintendo Switch Lite or countless other retro game solutions. I would add that if you don't already have a tablet, it can scratch that itch as well. The fact that it has a base and the screen can be propped up, combined with its awesome battery life, makes it a great solution for watching videos in bed or traveling on a plane or bus. An ancillary benefit I found was I can use it to remotely monitor and operate my Panasonic GH4 camera, making it a great portable monitor when on shoots. So, if you love games, but really only old games, and you're really particular about portability and resolution, and you could use a tablet-like device anyway, well, then the price point starts to make sense. And it may just become one of your favorite new pieces of technology, as it has mine.
Now you're playing with power.
Thank you so much for watching my video. Hey, if you want to watch a whole lot more talk about specifically Super Nintendo, check out JuntSNES, a web series on this channel where we look at some of the most interesting, bizarre, and fun products and accessories from our friend's massive SNES collection. And if you're new to the channel, take a look around. You're going to see some weird stuff, but I promise you'll love it all.